At exactly 11:47 p.m. on New Year's Eve, in one of the most expensive homes in America, a billionaire made a joke that would destroy his life forever. The champagne glasses had just been refilled. The music was loud. Everyone was laughing. But in the corner of that glittering mansion stood a woman in a maid's uniform, her face blank, her hands trembling. And when the billionaire turned to her and made that joke, the entire room erupted in laughter. Everyone except her. He thought she was nobody. He was wrong. Because what happened after that night shocked everyone, including the man who thought money made him untouchable. This isn't just a story about wealth and cruelty. It's about pride, secrets, and a mistake no amount of money could erase. Because 3 days after that party, the maid vanished. And when the truth finally came out, it brought a powerful man to his knees. Let me take you back 6 months before that New Year's Eve party. Back to when Richard Halstead was still untouchable. Richard wasn't just rich. He was powerful. The kind of man who owned buildings with his name on them, who had politicians on speed dial, who could make or break careers with a single phone call. He'd built his empire from nothing, clawing his way up from a middle-class family in Ohio to become one of the wealthiest men in the country. His real estate empire spanned 3 continents. His net worth was estimated at over $2 billion. But people close to him noticed something else, something darker beneath all that success. Richard had a deep, almost pathological fear of being embarrassed. Of looking weak. Of being reminded where he came from. And he dealt with that fear by making sure everyone around him knew exactly where they stood. Beneath him. His mansion in the Hamptons was a monument to his success. 12 bedrooms. An indoor pool. A wine cellar worth more than most people's homes. And it required a staff of 15 people to maintain it. Gardeners, chefs, drivers, housekeepers. People he barely noticed. People who existed, in his mind, solely to serve him. And among those people was Maria. Maria Santos was 42 years old. She'd been working as Richard's housekeeper for 8 months when New Year's Eve arrived. She took the early bus every morning from her small apartment in Queens, a 2-hour commute each way. She had a 17-year-old daughter named Sophia who was a senior in high school, hoping for a college scholarship. Maria's husband had died 4 years earlier in a construction accident, leaving her with medical debt and a mortgage she could barely afford. The job at Richard's mansion paid well, better than anything else she could find. $16 an hour, plus occasional tips during holidays. She needed it. So she kept her head down, did her work, and stayed invisible. But Maria was more than what people saw. Before immigrating to the United States at 23, she'd been a law student in her home country. She'd completed 3 years of her degree before her family's financial situation forced her to leave school and find work. She spoke 4 languages fluently. She read voraciously, anything she could get her hands on, legal journals, history books, philosophy. During her lunch breaks at the mansion, while the other staff members scrolled through their phones, Maria read. She observed. She listened. And she remembered everything. Because Maria had learned something important in her 42 years. Powerful people always underestimate the help. They speak freely in front of maids and drivers and cooks, as if those people don't have ears, don't have minds, don't have memories. And over those 8 months working in Richard's home, Maria had heard things. Conversations about deals that skirted legal boundaries. Arguments with his attorney about offshore accounts. Casual mentions of payments that never appeared in official records. She didn't write anything down. She didn't need to. She just listened and remembered. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My mum said I can't hit 1,000 subscribers before today ends. Subscribe and let's prove her wrong. Now, Richard's wife had left him 3 years earlier. She'd walked away from the marriage with a settlement so large it required its own team of accountants, and she'd signed an NDA so airtight she couldn't even tell her own sister what she'd witnessed during their marriage. But the people who worked in that house, they knew. They'd seen the way Richard spoke to his wife before she left. The contempt. The casual cruelty. The way he'd humiliate her in front of guests, making jokes about her weight, her intelligence, her family background. After she left, he got worse. Without someone to absorb his cruelty at home, he turned it on his staff. He'd fire people on a whim. He'd dock pay for imaginary infractions. He once made a chef cry because a steak was cooked medium instead of medium rare, then fired him in front of the entire kitchen staff. The turnover was constant. But Maria stayed. She needed the job, yes. But there was something else. Something she never shared with anyone. A quiet determination that had been building inside her for months. December 31st started like any other day at the mansion. Maria arrived at 6 in the morning. The party was scheduled for 8 p.m., which meant there was an enormous amount of preparation to do. The catering company would handle the food, but the house needed to be immaculate. Every surface polished. Every room perfect. Richard had invited over 100 guests. Business partners, politicians, celebrities, the kind of people whose presence was supposed to prove how important he was. Maria spent the morning cleaning the main ballroom, the room where Richard would make his annual New Year's speech. She'd heard him practice it the week before, a self-aggrandizing monologue about success and power and the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people. As she polished the marble floors, she wondered if he even heard himself. If he understood how hollow those words sounded. By 7 p.m., the other staff members were in their positions. Maria had been assigned to work the coat room and assist with any cleaning emergencies during the party. She'd changed into her formal uniform, a black dress with a white apron, the kind of outfit designed to make service workers blend into the background. The guests began arriving at 8. She watched them from her position near the entrance. Women in designer gowns that cost more than Maria's annual salary. Men in custom suits, their watches worth more than her car. They handed her their coats without looking at her face. Without saying thank you. She was furniture to them. By 10 p.m., the party was in full swing. The champagne was flowing. The music was loud. People were laughing, dancing, making toasts. Richard was in his element, moving from group to group, telling stories, basking in the attention. Maria had retreated to the edge of the ballroom, staying out of the way, watching. And then, at 11:30 p.m., half an hour before midnight, Richard noticed her. He'd had too much to drink. His face was flushed, his voice too loud. He was standing with a group of his closest friends, all men like him, wealthy, powerful, used to getting whatever they wanted. And for some reason, his eyes landed on Maria. He called out to her. "Maria, come here." She hesitated, then walked over. The group of men turned to look at her. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the room, "I want you to meet Maria." Maria has been cleaning my toilets for 8 months now, and I have to say, she does an excellent job." Some people laughed. Maria's face remained neutral. Richard wasn't finished. "You know, Maria," he continued, "I've been thinking. You work so hard. You're here every day, scrubbing and cleaning and doing all those things that I would never want to do myself. And I realized something. You're probably the happiest person in this room. You don't have to worry about stock markets or business deals or any of that complicated stuff. You just clean, and then you go home. Simple life, right?" More laughter now. Maria looked at him. She didn't respond. Richard's smile widened. "I mean, look at her," he said to the group. "She doesn't even speak English that well, do you, Maria? Where are you from again? Mexico? Guatemala? One of those places?" Maria spoke quietly. "I'm from the United States. I was born in New Jersey." The smile on Richard's face faltered for just a second. "Oh, well, wherever your parents are from then. The point is, you don't have all these worries we have. You're blessed, really. You should be grateful." One of the men in the group, a hedge fund manager named David, laughed uncomfortably. "Come on, Richard, maybe that's enough." Richard ignored him. He was enjoying himself now, feeling the power of making someone squirm in front of an audience. "Actually, Maria, since you're here, why don't you get us some more champagne? Make yourself useful." The room had gone quieter. People were watching now, sensing something wrong but not willing to intervene. Maria looked at Richard for a long moment. Then she leaned in close, so close that only he could hear her. And she whispered something. The words were quiet, calm, deliberate. But whatever she said made Richard's face change completely. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes went wide. He stepped back, almost stumbling. Maria straightened up and walked away, heading toward the staff entrance. The room was silent now. People were looking at each other, confused. David touched Richard's arm. "Hey, you okay? What did she say?" Richard didn't answer. He stared at the door Maria had just walked through, and for the first time in decades, Richard Halstead looked genuinely afraid. What did Maria whisper to him? That's what everyone wanted to know. Some guests would later claim they saw Richard's hands shaking after she walked away. Others said he stopped drinking immediately, his entire demeanor changing from confident to paranoid. But whatever she said, it worked. Because the rest of the party, Richard couldn't focus. He barely spoke. He left before midnight, disappearing into his private study and locking the door. If you're still watching right now, comment "I'm still here." This story is about to take a turn no one expects. Monday morning, January 3rd, Maria didn't show up for work. The head of household staff, a woman named Patricia, called her phone. No answer. She called again an hour later. Still nothing. By noon, Patricia mentioned it to Richard. He was in his office, surrounded by papers, looking like he hadn't slept. "She didn't come in today," Patricia said. "Maria. Should I call the agency for a replacement?" Richard's head snapped up. Did she say anything? Did she leave a message? No, Patricia said, confused by his reaction. She just didn't show up. Richard stood up, pacing. Call her again. Keep calling. Patricia nodded slowly. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Richard snapped. Just find her. But Maria didn't answer her phone that day. Or the next day. Or the day after that. By the end of the week, her phone had been disconnected entirely. Patricia went to the address Maria had listed on her employment forms. It was an apartment building in Queens. The superintendent said Maria had paid through the end of the month but had left 3 days earlier with 2 suitcases. Didn't say where she was going. Richard was unraveling. His assistant noticed he'd stopped taking meetings. He'd cancelled a major business trip to Dubai. He spent hours locked in his study, making phone calls, yelling at someone on the other end. The rest of the staff noticed too. The confident, arrogant man they'd worked for had been replaced by someone paranoid and erratic. He fired 2 people that week for minor mistakes. He had the locks changed on all the doors. He hired a private investigator. Find her, he told the investigator, a former NYPD detective named Marcus Green. I don't care what it costs. Find Maria Santos. Marcus took the job, though he found it odd. Why was a billionaire so desperate to find a former maid? But he didn't ask questions. He just followed the money. The investigation turned up very little at first. Maria had no social media presence. No credit card activity after January 2nd. No bank withdrawals. She'd effectively disappeared. Her daughter, Sophia, had also vanished. The school confirmed she'd withdrawn on January 3rd, citing a family emergency. No forwarding address. Marcus dug deeper. He interviewed Maria's former co-workers. Most of them liked her, described her as quiet, hard-working, kind. But one woman, a cook named Teresa, mentioned something interesting. Maria asked a lot of questions, Teresa said. About Mr. Halstead. About his business. I thought it was just curiosity, you know. But now I wonder. Marcus reported this to Richard. The billionaire's paranoia intensified. He stopped sleeping. His lawyer, a shark named Jonathan Weiss, came to the mansion for an emergency meeting. Jonathan, Richard said, his voice hoarse. If someone had information. Sensitive information. What would they do with it? Depends on the information, Jonathan replied carefully. What are we talking about? Richard didn't answer directly. Hypothetically. If someone knew about certain financial arrangements. Offshore accounts. Payments that weren't properly documented. Jonathan's expression hardened. Richard, if you're telling me there's exposure. There's no exposure, Richard interrupted. I just need to know what someone could do with that kind of information. Jonathan leaned back. If they went to the IRS, the SEC, the media, it could be very, very bad. How bad? Career-ending bad. Prison bad. The room fell silent. Richard's hands were shaking. 2 weeks after New Year's Eve, an anonymous email arrived in the inbox of a journalist named Claire Morrison. Claire worked for a major investigative outlet, the kind that had taken down senators and CEOs. The email contained no text. Just a single attachment. A PDF. 47 pages long. Claire opened it. And as she read, her eyes went wider and wider. It was a detailed breakdown of Richard Halstead's financial activities over the past 5 years. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Shell companies used to hide income. Payments to government officials that looked suspiciously like bribes. Tax fraud. Money laundering. Everything was documented. Account numbers. Dates. Amounts. And at the end of the document, a single line. This information was compiled by someone who watched and listened for 8 months. Someone you didn't think was paying attention. Claire immediately began verifying the information. It took her and her team 3 weeks. But every single detail checked out. The account numbers were real. The shell companies existed. The payments could be traced. On February 15, Claire's outlet published the story. The headline read, "Billionaire real estate mogul Richard Halstead accused of massive tax fraud and money laundering." The article was devastating. It detailed everything. Within hours, it had gone viral. Within days, federal investigators had opened an official inquiry. Richard's world collapsed almost overnight. Business partners distanced themselves. Boards asked him to step down. His face was plastered across every news outlet, not as a success story but as a criminal. And through it all, Richard knew. He knew exactly who had done this. Maria. The maid he'd humiliated in front of 100 people. The woman he'd dismissed as simple, as beneath him. She'd been collecting evidence the entire time she'd worked for him. Listening to his phone calls. Watching his meetings. Remembering every careless word he'd spoken in front of her, assuming she was too stupid or too insignificant to understand. If you're still here, subscribe, because stories like this only work when people stay. But here's what nobody knew yet. Maria wasn't acting alone. And she wasn't driven purely by revenge. Let me take you back to 6 years earlier, to a courtroom in Manhattan. A young woman named Elena Rodriguez was suing a real estate developer for wrongful termination and sexual harassment. She'd worked as a paralegal at one of his companies. She'd been fired after rejecting her boss's advances. She'd gathered evidence, filed a lawsuit, and was prepared to fight. The real estate developer was Richard Halstead. And he crushed her. His legal team was ruthless. They dragged Elena's personal life through the mud. They found old social media posts and twisted them. They brought in character witnesses who'd been paid to lie. They buried her in motions and delays until she ran out of money to pay her attorney. Elena lost the case. She lost her reputation. She lost everything. 3 months after the case was dismissed, Elena took her own life. She left behind a mother, 2 younger sisters, and a journal filled with entries about the injustice of a system that protected powerful men. Maria had known Elena. They'd met at a community center where Maria volunteered, teaching English as a second language. Elena had been one of her students. They'd become friends. When Elena died, Maria went to the funeral. She sat in the back of the church and listened to Elena's mother sob. And she made a decision. She couldn't bring Elena back. But she could make sure Richard Halstead faced consequences. So she applied for a job at his mansion. She studied his business. She learned everything she could about financial law, tax codes, and regulatory requirements. She spent 8 months documenting every illegal thing he did. And she waited for the right moment. New Year's Eve wasn't random. Maria had planned it. She knew Richard would drink too much. She knew he'd feel powerful and invincible. She knew he'd make a mistake. And when he did, when he humiliated her in front of everyone, she'd leaned in and whispered, "I know about the Cayman accounts. I know about Senator Morrison's payoff. I know everything." And on January 2, Everything you've done is going public. That's why Richard panicked. That's why he hired investigators. That's why he couldn't sleep. Because he knew she wasn't bluffing. The night of the party, Maria had gone home, packed her bags, picked up her daughter, and disappeared. She'd sent the documents to Claire Morrison from an internet cafe in Pennsylvania. Then she'd driven to a small town in Oregon where she'd rented a house under a different name. She'd spent 8 months preparing for this. She'd saved money. She'd planned her exit. And she'd made sure there was no way Richard could find her before the story broke. By the time the article was published, Maria and Sophia were safe. And Richard Halstead's empire was in ruins. If this hooked you already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment because what happens next will absolutely shatter your expectations. 3 months after the article was published, federal prosecutors charged Richard Halstead with 14 counts of tax fraud, money laundering, and bribery. His trial became one of the most watched in years. Every detail of his crimes was laid out in court. Every offshore account. Every illegal payment. Every lie. His defense team tried to argue that the evidence had been obtained illegally, that Maria had violated his privacy. But the judge disagreed. Maria hadn't hacked his computers. She hadn't stolen documents. She'd simply listened and remembered. And nothing she'd done was illegal. In October, Richard was found guilty on 12 of the 14 counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His assets were seized to pay back taxes and penalties. The mansion was sold at auction. Everything he'd built was gone. And Maria? She never gave an interview. She never appeared in court. She'd sent a single statement to Claire Morrison, which Claire had included in a follow-up article. It read, "I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for a young woman named Elena Rodriguez, who was destroyed by a system that protects powerful men and discards everyone else. I did this because people like Richard Halstead believe they're untouchable. That the people who serve them are invisible. That cruelty has no consequences. I did this to prove them wrong." That was it. No dramatic confrontation. No moment where Maria faced Richard and delivered a triumphant speech. Just quiet, methodical justice. She dismantled his entire life without ever raising her voice. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, a reporter tracked down Maria in Oregon. She was working as a paralegal at a small nonprofit that helped immigrant workers fight exploitation. Sophia had started college on a full scholarship, studying law. Maria declined to be interviewed on camera, but she did speak briefly to the reporter off the record. She said, "People always underestimate the help. They think because someone cleans their house or serves their food, that person must not be smart. Must not be paying attention. Must not matter. But the truth is, the people you ignore are often the ones who see you most clearly." Richard Halstead thought he was untouchable because he had money. But money can't protect you from the truth. And it can't protect you from the people you've underestimated. The reporter asked if she regretted anything. Maria thought for a moment. Then she said, "I regret that Elena isn't here to see this. She deserved justice. I just made sure she finally got it. So here's my question for you. What would you have done if you were Maria? Would you have stayed silent and kept the job? Would you have confronted Richard directly? Or would you have done exactly what she did, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to bring everything crashing down? And if you were at that New Year's Eve party, if you'd witnessed Richard humiliating Maria in front of everyone, would you have said something? Would you have stood up for her? Or would you have laughed along with everyone else? These aren't easy questions. Because the truth is, most of us want to believe we'd be the hero in a situation like this. But in reality, we're more often the bystanders. Hit that subscribe button, let's prove my mum wrong today. The people who witness cruelty and do nothing. The people who benefit from systems that protect the powerful and ignore everyone else. Maria's story isn't just about one billionaire getting what he deserved. It's about something deeper. It's about dignity. About the way we treat people we think are beneath us. About the danger of underestimating anyone. Because the person serving your coffee, cleaning your office, driving your car, that person has a story. Has intelligence. Has dignity. And when you strip that dignity away, when you humiliate someone just because you can, you never know what consequences might follow. Richard Halstead learned that lesson the hardest way possible. He spent his entire life believing money made him invincible. And a woman he paid $16 an hour proved him wrong. Let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Do you believe Maria was justified in what she did? Do you think Richard's punishment fit his crimes? How would you feel if this happened to you, if someone you dismissed and underestimated turned out to be documenting everything you'd done wrong? And if this story made you think differently about how we treat the people around us, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Because sometimes the quietest people are the most dangerous to underestimate. My mum said I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Click that subscribe button right now. And if you think this story was shocking, the next one is even darker. A story about secrets, power, and the moment when someone's carefully constructed life came crashing down in the most unexpected way. You won't want to miss it.